The first day I taught at HBS, I was terrified. And everyone, I taught at Kellogg at Northwestern for 2 years, and Kellogg's a great business school, also known to be super friendly and team-oriented, and the students are seen as very friendly. That's the stereotype, and I experienced them that way. HBS does not have that stereotype, and I got there and everyone's like, oh, they're gonna eat you up, they're sharks, and if they smell a drop of blood in the water, they're gonna come in for the kill, and you gotta be really tough. And one person said to me, don't let them know you haven't taught a class here before, and I'm like, I think with the internet and all, they can figure that out. But so that people were really saying, present a false self, right? So put up this front. And I thought, oh my God, how am I going to do this? Like, this takes so much cognitive bandwidth to do this, to be somebody different, and to share all kinds of information with these really smart 95 people whose names I'm supposed to all remember. And so I decided the day before, not based on any research, just from my own personal experiences and my own kind of pathological optimism, that I was going to trust them, that probably they were there because they actually wanted to learn. And they probably didn't want to see me fail. They probably wanted me to succeed because that would be better for everyone. That's probably not true of all of them, but I trusted that it was true of most of them. And that's how I went in. And that allowed me to be warm, to not fear them. If I didn't fear them, they didn't fear me. So I really encourage you to think about both of those traits when you're interacting with people. Not to get too hung up on showing your competence, because we're so worried about showing our competence that we do it at the expense of showing our warmth and our trustworthiness. So I just want you to keep that in mind when you're connecting with people. Ultimately, we convince by our presence. And this is a very simple and elegant sentence. I love it because I don't think we just convince others by our presence. Oh, we do. We're more persuasive when we're present. We convince ourselves. Like, the more we see ourselves with going through those situations and being present, the more convinced we are that we can do it the next time. So presence convinces. What prevents us from getting there? So you know these things now. Can you just apply them and do that? Probably not, because we're not very good at kind of talking ourselves off the ledge when we're anxious. I think this crowd is too young. I know one of you might remember. Does anyone remember Stuart Smalley, a character on Saturday Night Live? Okay, it's just a very, very small show of hands. All right, well, Stuart Smalley was played by Al Franken, who's now a politician. And his character, it was called Daily Affirmations with Stuart Smalley, and he had a little cable access TV show. And he'd look into this long mirror and sit and go, I'm good enough, I'm smart enough, and doggone it, people like me, over and over again. And the idea was that this should make him feel better. But of course, inevitably, by the end, he felt terrible, and he'd be saying things like, I am in a shame spiral, and I will die homeless and penniless and 20 pounds overweight, and no one will ever love me, and they'll cancel the show. And the idea that, what was funny about it is that we kind of know that when we feel bad about ourselves, we're really bad at just telling ourselves, okay, now I'm great, I'm actually awesome, and I'm gonna do all these things and it will be different. We're not good at talking ourselves off the ledge. So that prevents us from being present. But the key, I would say, is this sense of power versus powerlessness. So when people think about sort of the characteristics that make up sort of general well-being, they focus on happiness and they focus on lack of stress. I think that the other component that matters a lot, and I'm going to show you why, is power, is feeling powerful, feeling self-efficacy, feeling a sense of agency, that you can get things done that you want to do, and that your efforts will be effective. When people feel powerful, and this has been shown across literally hundreds of studies in the lab. So when they're made to feel powerful by being assigned to a more powerful role or just being primed with words that are about power, it changes them psychologically sort of across the board. What you see is that it affects their feelings. So not only do they feel more powerful, they feel more confident, they feel more optimistic, they feel better about other people, they feel just generally good when they feel powerful. It also changes their thoughts. So they think more clearly, they think more creatively, they're better at abstract thinking. What happens is that they're not worrying about that feeling of powerlessness, so it frees them up to kind of be at their best cognitively. Their executive functions are improved. Their behavior changes, and the key here is that when people feel powerful, they act. When we feel powerless, we don't act. So power allows us to do what we want to do, and that's not just on behalf of ourselves, it's on behalf of others as well. So think about a time in your life when you saw something bad happening, something unjust, and you wanted to speak up, but you didn't speak up. You didn't speak up because you felt powerless. It wasn't just diffusion of responsibility, there are lots of other things going on there, but it's really because you felt like you couldn't actually do anything, or people wouldn't take you seriously, right? So that sense of powerlessness shuts you down. It's a fun experiment that I did not do, that was done by a power researcher named Adam Galinsky. I think it kind of illustrates this. He had people come into the lab, he primes them to feel powerful or powerless. He takes them to a little room, they're sitting in front of a table about this big here, and they're told to fill out these questionnaires. Adam is not actually concerned about the questionnaires, he's looking at a behavioral measure. The behavioral measure is this: sitting in that tiny room is a fan blowing right onto them, really like on high. So he wants to know if the powerful people turn off the fan or not. What do the powerless people do? So he sets them up, he leaves, and then they just record them. And it turns out the people who were made to feel powerful get up and they turn the fan off. The people who felt powerless just sit there for however long, 30 minutes, with that fan blowing in their faces. Why? You know, did they wait to ask the experimenter? They felt that they couldn't do that they weren't allowed to do that. So when we feel powerful, we act. It also affects our physiology. It affects how coordinated we are. We become more coordinated even at things like golfing when we are feeling powerful. It affects our long-term health. So power and status are good predictors of a lower rate of stress-related illnesses. It affects hormones. It affects our general, our general physical well-being. So it's affecting all of these components, and together, this is what we call the behavioral approach system. When we feel powerful, it activates the behavioral approach system. This is a constellation of interrelated things that are happening. Your thoughts, feelings, behaviors, and physiology are linked, and they are reinforcing each other. So as you feel powerful, it's opening you up. My favorite quote about power is from Robert Caro, who was Lyndon Johnson's biographer. And someone asked him in an interview with The Guardian if power corrupts. And he said, "Power does not necessarily corrupt, but power always reveals." And I thought that was perfect, right? It doesn't corrupt, it reveals who you actually are, right? You're free to be who you are. Powerlessness does the opposite. It inhibits you. Everything that I showed you that power does, powerlessness does the opposite. It activates the behavioral inhibition system. This is true in humans, it's true in non-human primates, and it's true in other mammals that have been studied. So you get these very, very different things. And when you think about it, when you think of what presence is, you see that when we feel powerless, you know, our bodies are telling us to fight, flee, or faint. They're telling us to not be present. They're telling us to shut down or get out of there, you know, or to push back, but not to actually be present. So powerlessness blocks presence, and power cultivates presence. Now the problem is that most of these situations don't require us to fight, flee, or faint. We've just encoded them that way. So we haven't evolved beyond that response, even when it's totally maladaptive for us to go into that state. It would be much better if we could just sort of stay calm. Now, before we move on, I want you to check your posture and just pay attention to how you are holding yourself now, because we spend a lot of time sitting, and I want you to pay attention to even small things that you're doing. Are you raising your shoulders? Are you pulling them forward? Is your chest sunken in, or is it expansive? Are your breaths shallow or deep? Are they slow or fast? And then what are you doing with your limbs, with your arms, with your legs? Are you wrapping yourself up, touching your face, your neck? How much are you contracting versus expanding? And this can be very, very subtle. But just pay attention to that, because that is probably the way you're sitting now is your default sitting position. And I want to convince you that even the way you sit throughout the day is affecting the way you feel. and that has the potential to affect the way that you interact with other people. Your body and your mind are constantly conversing with each other. It's not just your mind telling your body what to do. Your body is telling your mind what's going on. If your body starts to contract, your mind is going, ooh, maybe I'm in an unsafe situation, right? And it's going to follow. So I want to look at body language that has to do with power. And that body language is body language that's either expansive or contractive. So across the animal kingdom, and Darwin noted in 1872 that this was the case, animals that have status and power, they take up more space, right? They expand, they puff their chests out, they sit at the top of the hill, they take up the most visible space, they pound their chests. Some primates can cause their hair to stand on end to make themselves appear bigger. Chimps will actually pick up sticks and hold them out to make themselves look bigger. It's not just primates, it's also true of other animals. When they want to signal status and power, they make themselves bigger than the other. The ears come out. I mean, elephant has the advantage already, but in some ways. You see it even with snakes and with swans, right? Same kind of expansiveness. The peacock is a beautiful display. It's obviously, the colors matter as well, but the dance of raising and expanding the tail feathers is this beautiful display of status and power to attract a mate, right? And people do the same thing, right? So we do see people using expansive postures in the same way when they feel powerful or when they're trying to attract a mate. And this is my husband, and it did work in that case. But I do think, I have to say, I met him because of this picture, but I study body language, so I like to think that I did not fall for it, but I just thought it was interesting. Anyway, he's a nice guy. So this is the powerful posture, though, that I think has gotten the most attention from researchers, and that also tells us the most about the relationship between power and expansiveness among humans. So this is what gymnasts do before and after a routine. It's scripted, right? It's choreographed. They do it whether they've failed or succeeded. Why do they do this? Why is this the pose that they choose? It's showing confidence and victory, right? That's what's being signaled by this. So you want to go out there, and before you even perform, you want to signal that you're victorious, right? You want to get them thinking of you in that way. So that's why gymnasts do this. But the thing is, in most sports, it's not scripted. It's not choreographed. It's something that happens spontaneously. Now, we know this not just from watching the Olympics and other sports, but because a researcher named Jessica Tracy at the University of British Columbia has been studying this posture for probably about 15 years now, and she has studied it in dozens of different cultures around the world, including cultures where she had to hike in and talk to people who had never interacted with an outsider. What she finds is that when people win all over the world, they spontaneously do this. Just as smiling and happiness are universal expressions of emotion, this is a universal postural expression of pride and power and confidence. So let's look at a bunch of different sports athletes from all over the world. And they're all winning. This is the moment of their victory. This guy ran a 5K. He is 100 years old. He's a World War II vet. And I thought this was a beautiful picture. These are kids in Cambodia. I taught in Cambodia last year. And it's a very different culture in many ways. And when it comes to more intentional nonverbal behavior, it's very different. But still, when people win, you see the same thing happening. This happened around the corner, as you know. So this is a few years ago. This is, I don't need to tell you people who this is. And he's running, he's got a home run, he's running the bases, and this is happening at the same time. I don't know if you guys remember this. So this is a Fenway police officer who probably has come in here to eat, I bet. Because I've seen a lot of my friends get pictures with him now, and he'll do this with them. But this is so he's watching the Red Sox winning, rather than helping the outfielder from the other team who's possibly having a head injury. Because even when we aren't ourselves winning, we have that vicarious sense of power. When our people win, when our teams win, when our families win, like we win too. We feel proud too. So there's something actually kind of beautiful about that. I mean, here's a whole stadium full of people doing this. You know, you look across sports, you see the same kind of thing. All their arms up in the air, right? This is real exuberance and victory and power and pride. And I think that what's interesting about this, and going back to this guy, is that from an evolutionary perspective, you could argue that this makes no sense because you've already won. You did the task and you've won. Why not collapse into the fetal position and get an IV drip? You know, why expand? Why squander more resources? It's totally inefficient. Economists should hate this, but this is what we do. We do it because that feeling of power and pride overwhelms whatever physiological need we have to recover right away. I think this is the most compelling evidence. If it's not compelling that people all over the world do this, know that even congenitally blind people do the same thing. So people who've never seen anyone do this, when they win, they throw their arms out. They throw their arms up into the air. They tend to lift their chins and smile. It's a universal expression. Now, why is that important? It's important because we know that smiling and happiness are related. We know that, that and surprise are related. We know that there are universal expressions that are facial expressions. And we know that you get the effects in both directions. When you feel happy, you smile. It's also true that when you smile, it can lift your mood. Do you see the same thing if posture and expansiveness are linked to power universally? If that's hardwired in the brain, could you get the same effect backwards with this as well? Now, that's not the only posture that's associated with power. You've got all kinds of variations on this. So I just want to show you some other examples. And when you look at these, it certainly signals power and status to you. You've got the superhero pose, leaning over the desk, another generation of poses. And one thing I have noticed is that the more Western the culture is, the more expansive posture is on the horizontal axis. So East Asian cultures, for example, although you see the same thing in that spontaneous moment of winning, in more planful interactions, what you see is that in East Asian cultures, people expand more along the vertical axis. So how high or low do they bow? Do they lift their glasses during a toast? Do they sit or do they stand? You do not see a lot of this. If you went into, a Japanese interview like this, you would be escorted out of the building. It would not go over well. But when you get into more Western cultures, you see more and more of this horizontal expansiveness. It's just sort of a fun piece of trivia to watch for in customers.